The 14th century, a time of knights, castles, and the occasional peasant revolt. Things were going pretty well, until a certain uninvited guest showed up. We're talking about the Black Death. This wasn't just any medieval inconvenience. This was the kind of disaster that made everyone say, you know what, maybe 1347 isn't our year. So, how did it all start? One word: fleas and rats. Okay, that's two words, but trust me, it gets worse. You see, back in 1347, people were minding their own business when some very unfriendly fleas hitchhiked their way across Europe on the backs of rats. And let's just say they weren't exactly bringing good news. Now you'd think someone might have noticed the literal signs of doom creeping into town. But nope, people were busy with important medieval stuff, like trying not to die from everything else. So, when the first victims started coughing and breaking out in suspicious lumps, most folks just thought, probably just a cold. It wasn't long before people started realizing this wasn't just a bad day at the office. As the Black Death spread like wildfire, word got out that maybe this whole plague thing was something to worry about. And so, Europe braced itself for the inevitable, in the most medieval way possible. And just like that, the Black Death had arrived, unwelcome, unrelenting, and really, really bad. So buckle up, because this is where things go from kind of gross to end-of-the-world level disaster. And so began one of the deadliest pandemics in human history, with all the drama, despair, and downright weirdness you'd expect from the Middle Ages. But don't worry, we're just getting started, because the Black Death wasn't just a plague. Oh no, it was an experience. A really, really bad one. It all starts in October 1347. A group of Genoese sailors returning from a fun-filled trip to the Black Sea, where they did the usual medieval stuff, like trading and eating. And when they dock in Sicily, what do they bring back? Not souvenirs or exotic spices, but something way better: the plague. That's right, medieval Europe. Your days of peace and prosperity are officially over. Now, at first, people in Messina were probably like, hey, maybe it's just a really bad cold. But after a few days, it became clear that this was not your run-of-the-mill medieval sniffles. In fact, this was a full-on biological disaster. The town council tried everything, closing the ports, blaming the sailors, blaming the rats, blaming the weather. None of it worked. And just like that, the Black Death is off to the races. In no time at all, it's spreading faster than a bad medieval rumor. From Sicily, the plague doesn't just walk, it runs. Italy, France, Spain. It's like the ultimate medieval road trip, except instead of postcards, the plague leaves behind mass graves and panic. Fun, right? Thanks, Genoese sailors. You really nailed the whole sharing is caring thing. The plague doesn't just stroll into towns, it storms in like it's got VIP tickets to the apocalypse. Take Florence, for example. By early 1348, Florence is known for its art, its culture, and its fantastic plagues. Thousands of people start dropping like flies. But hey, at least the city's still got great sculptures. And of course, because the plague is all about equality, it doesn't just stop at the big cities. Nope, even the tiniest, most remote villages are getting the deluxe plague package. You know, just to make sure no one feels left out. And let's not forget Paris. By mid-1348, the City of Light is looking more like the City of Nightmares. The plague sweeps through so fast, even the fashionable Parisians can't keep up. So, while the nobility is off trying to pretend they're immune by hiding in their fancy castles, the peasants are down in the muck, trying their best to avoid death, and failing spectacularly. At this point, the plague's basically the medieval version of going viral. It's everywhere, and it's spreading faster than a bad minstrel song at a banquet. By the time anyone figures out what's happening, it's too late, and the rats are just having a field day. The real winners of the plague? Definitely the rats. With every passing day, the plague steamrolls through more cities, like a really enthusiastic but totally uninvited guest. By the end of 1348, half of Europe is in full-on meltdown mode. If you weren't dead from the plague, you were probably just really stressed. But hey, at least the plague wasn't picky. It didn't care if you were a prince or a peasant. Everyone got to join the fun. So, in summary, By the end of 1348, if you were still standing, you were either extremely lucky or just really good at avoiding rats. Either way, you deserved a medal. Or, maybe just a plague-free day. That would have been nice. So, what's it like to catch the Black Death, you ask? Oh, it's a real treat. Let's break it down. First, you get the chills. Not the, ooh, I'm cold, let's cozy up by the fire kind. Nope, we're talking, I've just walked into a haunted house filled with ghosts and rats-level chills. Then comes the fever, followed by giant festering buboes. But wait, there's more. After the chills and fever, it's time for a little nausea. You'll also be treated to some lovely fatigue, perfect for all those long naps you'll need, except you might never wake up from one of them. So cozy. But let's get to the real star of the show, the buboes. Oh yes, these bad boys are the signature look of the Black Death, and let me tell you, they make a statement. Picture golf ball-sized lumps popping up in your armpits and groin, but more grotesque. And here's the fun part, they're filled with pus. And if you're lucky, they'll burst. Yup, that's a thing that can happen. Medieval life, truly a magical time. Now you might be thinking, surely there's more. And you're right. After the buboes have had their fun, it's time for a little gangrene to kick in. That's when your fingers, toes and nose start turning a lovely shade of black. Very chic, very in season for, death. It's called the Black Death for a reason. At this point, if you're still holding out hope, well, let's just say the odds aren't in your favor. You've got a high fever, exploding buboes, blackened limbs, and now you're coughing up blood. Yep, the plague has officially moved into your lungs. And if you somehow survive all that, congratulations. You've won the medieval lottery. Except instead of a prize, you just get to keep living in a plague-ridden world. Lucky you. And now, we turn to one of the Black Death's greatest hits, the complete and utter collapse of society. Because if there's one thing a plague knows how to do, it's throw civilization into chaos. Let's just say that when half the population suddenly dies, things don't exactly run smoothly. Let's start with the obvious. When the Black Death hit, there weren't exactly enough workers left to keep the economy going. Farms, abandoned, shops, closed, guilds, decimated. Who needs infrastructure when you've got a plague, right? The Black Death also gave us the world's worst supply chain issues. Imagine this. You walk into a medieval bakery only to find out that the baker, his apprentice, and the guy who milled the flour all, died. So, unless you're planning to make bread out of your hopes and dreams, you're out of luck. And then there were the knights. Oh yes, the chivalrous defenders of the realm. Only when the Black Death arrived, many knights found themselves less focused on heroic deeds and more on, not dying. Even castles weren't safe from the plague's reach, so the nobility did what any reasonable person would do. They locked the gates and hoped the plague wouldn't knock. So, with no one left to work the fields, bake the bread or defend the kingdom, you'd think it couldn't get worse. But wait, there's more. With the plague decimating villages and towns, the whole concept of law and order started to crumble. Because who needs laws when most of the people enforcing them are gone? Without law enforcement or leadership, you'd think people might, form a nice little community and help each other out. Well, not quite. The Black Death turned society into a medieval version of every man for himself, with everyone scrambling to survive. And some people took survival to new and questionable levels. Of course, some people did try to keep the faith and maintain order, bless their hopeful little hearts. The church, for example, offered plenty of spiritual guidance when they weren't too busy panicking themselves. But with priests dropping like flies, it became a bit of a challenge to keep up the religious services. The result? A lot of people suddenly rethinking their Sunday plans. And then there were the flagellants, those guys who thought the best way to avoid the plague was to, beat the sin out of themselves. This group of devout fanatics travelled from town to town, whipping themselves into a frenzy, literally, hoping to convince God to take the plague back. Spoiler alert, it didn't work. With law, religion and social order on shaky ground, some people turned to less conventional means of survival. Superstitions and folk remedies spread like, the plague itself. Need to avoid infection? Try carrying a dried toad in your pocket. Feel a bit feverish? Don't worry. Just bury a potato under your house. At this point, everyone was willing to try anything. In the end, the Black Death didn't just claim lives, it reshaped society. Entire communities were wiped out, economies crumbled, and centuries-old structures of power and order were forever changed. But through the chaos, people adapted in strange and surprising ways. So, the Black Death was here, and Europe wasn't exactly prepared. What do you do when a plague comes knocking at your door? Well, in the 14th century, there were two main survival strategies: panic and pray, and sometimes both at the same time. Let's start with the first line of defense: isolation. People quickly realized that if they wanted to avoid the plague, they had to avoid each other. Sound familiar? Well, medieval quarantine had a few quirks. Forget social distancing, more like social vanishing. Entire families barricaded themselves inside and towns sealed their gates. But staying at home wasn't enough for everyone. Some folks took things to the next level. Enter the plague doctors. These guys weren't your average physicians. They were more like the medieval version of essential workers, with a flair for fashion. Armed with those creepy beak masks, they ventured into the plague-ridden streets, poking at patients and pretending they had any idea what was going on. Of course, while some people were whipping themselves or smelling the flowers, others simply decided to, well, run away. Fleeing to the countryside, they figured, no plague out there, right? But let's just say the plague had a way of catching up with you. The whole you can run but you can't hide thing. Very true when it came to the Black Death. And so, while half the continent was decimated, the survivors picked up the pieces and eventually life went on. Well, sort of. The Black Death left its mark on the land, on the people, and definitely on Europe's sense of optimism. As the dust settled on the grim landscape of a plague-ridden Europe, what was left in its wake? It wasn't just a lot of empty houses and dramatic paintings of skeletons. The aftermath of the Black Death was a mosaic of societal change, economic upheaval, and a little bit of good old-fashioned chaos. First up, the population. Remember that third of Europe that kicked the bucket? Yeah, well, after the initial shock, it turned out to be not great for those who remained. With fewer people to work the fields and fill the towns, you'd think things would go swimmingly. But alas, this is history, not a fairy tale. With crops going to waste and no one to tend to them, food shortages hit hard. And let's be real, no one likes a food shortage. It led to higher prices and more unrest than a juggler at a funeral. Starving peasants? That's a recipe for a revolt. Then there's the question of labor. With so many folks off to that big village in the sky, workers suddenly became a hot commodity. Peasants who survived found themselves in a powerful position for the first time, demanding better wages and conditions. Talk about a workplace revolution. But it wasn't just the labor market that changed. The plague had a way of transforming social structures. Suddenly, the rich weren't quite as powerful. After all, their gold couldn't buy them immunity. Those poor nobles had to start treating their workers like human beings. What a tragedy. But let's not forget about the social life. People started gathering to share their stories and grieve their losses, leading to a boom in, you guessed it, medieval entertainment. Because nothing screams recovery like a good old-fashioned bard telling tales of horror and hilarity. The aftermath of the plague forced society to confront its fragility and rethink its values. Education began to shift as the need for knowledgeable healers grew. Universities sprang up, and with them, a thirst for knowledge flourished, because now knowledge was literally a matter of life and death. The arts flourished too, inspired by the duality of life and death. Poets, painters, and musicians crafted works that reflected the human condition with newfound depth. The Black Death may have brought sorrow, but it also birthed creativity and innovation that would pave the way for the Renaissance. Talk about a plot twist. And there you have it. The aftermath of the plague wasn't just a story of doom and gloom, but one of resilience, adaptation, and a sprinkle of humor. From the ashes of despair, a new society began to take shape, with all its quirks and challenges. So next time you hear someone say, "We'll never recover," just remember the Black Death and the quirky humans who survived it. Thanks for watching, and please like and subscribe. See you next time.